Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I'm your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again two of Ron Paul's former staff members, namely Jeff Deist, who was chief of staff for Ron Paul during Dr. Paul's run for the presidency, and Daniel McAdams, who worked with Ron Paul as his foreign affairs advisor. Jeff is currently president of the Mises Institute. That's an educational organization dedicated to promoting Austrian economics, freedom, and peace, and he has a legal background with a focus on tax law. You can follow Jeff and all that the Mises Institute is doing by going to Mises.org. And Daniel is continuing to work with Ron Paul on an almost daily basis, I guess, certainly at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. And you can go there to follow what Daniel's doing and what's going on at the Ron Paul Institute at ronpaulinstitute.org. Welcome, both of you, to Turning Hard Times into Good Times.
Thank you.
Daniel, I'd like to... Ron Paul, who you work closely with, has let it be known that he's not a real big fan of Donald Trump, and that is really no surprise to me, actually, because Ron Paul, from what I don't know him as well as either you or Jeff, but from a personality point of view, he seems almost opposite of Donald Trump. Ron is, I see him as a humble, polite person, very willing to acknowledge the goodness and the performance when it's good in others. Trump, on the other hand, seems to be a boisterous person who holds himself out to be pretty much better than almost any other human being alive. It's sort of the way I see him anyway. And the two very opposite people, personality-wise anyway. But Trump has certainly said some things on the foreign policy front that must be at least somewhat agreeable to Dr. Paul. Daniel, for example, he is suggesting that perhaps we should try to get along with Russia rather than constantly saber-rattling. You probably don't want to speak for Dr. Paul, but are there some things, Daniel, that you see Dr. Paul is hopeful about with respect to the Trump presidency?
Well, I think you're right, Jay, that he has been very critical of Donald Trump's campaign and style, and partly it is style, but also there is kind of an authoritarian bent to it, and I think even some of Trump's supporters, even in the libertarian movement, would say, look, he's not a libertarian, but he's less bad than Hillary, and I think that's certainly a legitimate position to take. But he does have this authoritarian streak, this idea that I will get the job done, I can get it done. And for someone like Dr. Paul, who's fought against a strong presidency for, his entire political career, when you have a president-elect that looks to aspire to that sort of strong executive, it does cause some alarm bells to go off. But again, you're also right that there are some indications that Trump may pursue a better foreign policy than at least his last two predecessors, and something to be hopeful for. And I think, for many people on foreign policy, the Russia issue is key because that is the issue that could erupt into a worldwide nuclear war. And nobody wants that. So if a President Trump will walk us back from the precipice that Obama put us on, and from where Hillary promised to take us even further, then I think that would be a great achievement, regardless of his other shortcomings in foreign policy.
Well, certainly one of the most, if not the most important issue that we're facing right now, in my view. Well, Jeff, an article written by Robert Perry titled "Trump's Need to Trust America," which appears on the Ron Paul Institute website, Perry states the following. He says, and I quote, "Barack Obama's chance for a transformative presidency ended when he bowed to official Washington's foreign policy establishment of neocons and liberal interventionists and brought into the elitist notion that American people should be guided by propaganda, not informed facts," end of quote. Jeff, would you agree with that statement from Robert Perry? And if so, do you think Trump could possibly defy the elites and the military-industrial complex and manage to stay alive at the same time? Or might he, in fact, face a similar fate to that of President Kennedy, who dared to take on some of the establishment, some of the most important establishment institutions? What are your thoughts? Can Trump really pull it off if he wants to?
I think we forget sometimes that incentives matter. There are literally tens or hundreds of thousands of people in and around the D.C. Beltway, not only in the form of federal employees, but also lobbyists and lawyers. trade associations, that sort of thing, who all make their living off of the status quo. And then, of course, there are many millions more when it comes to industries that surround central banking that make their living off the status quo. So he's clearly up against some very significant structural forces when it comes to draining the swamp or anything like that. And I think we should view Trump mostly as a change in tenor and style. You noted earlier that he's this megalomaniac, maniacal authoritarian, and I think that's probably true, but it's interesting how we don't see this sort of dutiful policy maven Hillary as a lunatic when she quite clearly is. I think anyone who aspires to the presidency at this point is somewhat unhinged, Ron Paul accepted, simply because it's become a position that no human being could ever fathom. No one should have their individual responsibility over nuclear codes. No one can understand the geopolitics of the world or domestic politics or the world economy or the domestic economy. These are unknowable things by definition. I don't view Trump's victory as something better or worse based on Trump or who he's going to appoint. I just say it's interesting that many American voters went off the narrative, the inevitability of Hillary, the inevitability of progressivism, the inevitability of globalism. So I think that's where we, as always, Jay, that's where we have to hold out hope is it on the individual level.
Yeah, that the masses will revolt, in fact, as they did in 1776. Daniel, looking at foreign policy, what are the main issues that Donald Trump will face as he's sworn into office on January 20th? And how do you think he will respond to them?
Well, I think the absolute main issue is the neoconservatives. And, Jeff hit it on the head when he said, really, there is no one person that can do this kind of job, who should do this kind of job. And that's what the presidency has become, but without guiding principles, it becomes a playground for what we call the deep state, because the president can't know all these very complex geopolitical issues like Jeff pointed out. He really is held hostage to the so-called experts, the people who permanently make their life in the Washington Beltway, who live extremely well on the gravy train that's called the military-industrial complex. And so it makes it very, very difficult, even if he had the inclination to make a change, because the job is too big. If you had the guiding principles of a Ron Paul and a Lou Rockwell and a Jeff Deist and the others, then you would understand that you have to limit yourself and what the role of the United States should be in the world, and that actually makes it very simple. I mean, I had a pretty easy job in some ways on Capitol Hill, because I knew when the bills were coming down on foreign policy how bad they were going to be. So we were guided by principle rather than maneuvering. But quickly, the main thing that he'll face is the neocons. The neocons are going to come in. They're going to whisper in his ear. They're going to flatter him. They're going to cajole him. They did all of this to Obama, and they won. He couldn't resist them. I don't know that Trump can resist them. Certainly we can hope that he will.
Daniel, Obama promised the American people a less aggressive foreign policy, as you sort of alluded to. The powers of Washington got to him and overwhelmed Obama. But he promised the American people more transparency and a less aggressive foreign policy. But instead, we pretty much were treated with the opposite, I would say. He undertook an unprecedented crackdown on national security, whistleblowers, Snowden being an example, prosecuting more than all the other presidents combined in terms of whistleblowers. And he authorized partial and misleading releases of information about key events, which I know you are very familiar with. Instead of an informed public, his administration sought to maximize propaganda advantages. For example, the sarin gas attack outside of Damascus in 2013 and the shoot down of a Malaysian airliner Flight 17 back in 2014 over the Ukraine. Do you have any hope that a Trump presidency might overcome or might overturn some of these nasty initiatives of Obama that really served, in my view, to reduce life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Any hope on your... I mean, it seems to me that what Jeff was saying, we've got a strong-arm guy, which is almost the only hope that we have in dealing with the forces the military-industrial complex forces that we have in Washington. I mean, Ron Paul, your boss, both of your bosses, your boss, the boss of both of you, was really a mild-mannered, decent, good human being, is still, and we thank God for him. But, can a person like that deal with these people, or do you think, Daniel, that Trump has the potential or the ability to overcome and to stand firm against all of this manipulation that's going to come to him, inevitably will come to him by the military-industrial complex?
Well, the one good thing we can say about Trump is that he is his own man. He's not beholden to anyone. He ran a tight campaign. He spent the money as if it was his own, and a lot of it was. So I think his force of personality, while it causes concern on the authoritarian tendencies, it may actually be a benefit when it comes to standing up to these neocons. He might be able to smell the BS from further away than Obama was, and he might, hopefully, maybe I'm just fantasizing, but tell some of these creeps to take a hike when they start cajoling and whispering at him.
Yeah, we can hope. Jeff, turning to domestic policy and the economy, the equity markets seem to be having quite a party here at the end of 2016, believing that the government spending, stimulus, infrastructure stimulus, lower taxes, an overturn of NAFTA, perhaps these are some of the ideas, building a wall, the death of TPP, tough negotiations with China, all the stuff that Trump's talking about. Now, I don't know to what extent Wall Street really believes this stuff, but they're having quite a party, and maybe it's nothing more than just more fuel put into the system by the Federal Reserve. But are you at all hopeful that Wall Street, that the party that Wall Street's enjoying might be more than mere fantasy?
There's nothing structural backing it up. We're not Keynesians. We don't believe in animal spirits.
Right.
We don't believe that we can talk ourselves into good times any more than we can talk ourselves into a recession. The key here is fundamentals. It's capital accumulation, real gains in productivity, real jobs, real capex by companies that make money and pay dividends, and not just that artificially through financial means prop up their stock prices through stock buybacks and this sort of thing. So there's nothing out there that's really leading to genuine organic growth in jobs or in productivity, I would argue. So the question becomes, why are we hyperventilating about Dow 20,000? I think the answer is pretty simple, that since 2008 and 2009, really since 2001 with Alan Greenspan, but especially since 2008, 2009, we have been overheating the monetary base. It's more than quadrupled just since 2008. And while that money doesn't slosh around equally in the general economy, much of it remains sitting on the balance sheets of banks. It has to go somewhere, and one place it goes is into the equities market, because the banking and investor class is more interested in equities because they have more cash than the average Joe who makes $40,000 who's not particularly worried about the stock market but rather paying his bills. So there's a reason why newly created the monetary base goes into the equities market and housing markets in places like San Francisco and New York faster and more furiously and unevenly than it does into the price of a bag of ramen noodles. But nonetheless, if John Williams is to be believed, I think he is, 2017 we will start to see cracks in this artificial border between asset price inflation and actual consumer price inflation. So, I'm nothing but clear-eyed about the economy and where the growth is going to come from. Does Trump's election change things, energize things? I suppose it could. He's perhaps a bit more of a Fed hawk than Hillary Clinton would be, and perhaps a bit more of a deficit and tax hawk than Hillary Clinton would be. So if those are slightly happy things for markets and markets have reacted, then I'm all for it. But to see the equities markets grow as rapidly as they have without a corresponding growth in real productivity, and I might also add real wages, it just shows that it's an artifice, and it's not really doing anyone much good other than those who sell before the crash.
Right. Well, we've seen some productivity growth, but largely because of technology, and I think the wages have really suffered, as you mentioned. You'd like to also see wages, real wages rise, and it's another issue for another discussion, perhaps. But Daniel, we've had government now that seems to be spying on all its citizens all of the time, or at least it has the ability to do so. Now we learn that Obama just quietly signed the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act, or perhaps better known, I would call it perhaps the Fake News Act. Based on some of Trump's cabinet selections, do you have any hope that this Trump presidency might reverse things or might be able to reverse the damage that's done by this President Obama?
Well, we always have hope. I don't think Trump has ever pretended to be a real civil libertarian. So right. I don't think there's a lot to be optimistic about. But hopefully, when he looks at how grotesque this measure is, and of course, as usual, it was slipped into the National Defense Authorization Act in the dead of night. It was a standalone bill. Yeah, exactly. It was a standalone bill that they had to sneak in because it was a must-pass bill, so they snuck it in there and it passed. And it, essentially what it does, Jay, is it threatens all of us. It threatens the Mises Institute. It threatens Jay Taylor. It threatens the Ron Paul Liberty Report. Any organization that doesn't toe the line, any organization, for example, that says we shouldn't have World War III with Russia, all of a sudden it means that you are in the pay of Putin. You are a foreign propagandist. Yeah. And, a month ago, 2 months ago, I would have said it's just really an absurd, insane idea. But here the Washington Post comes out in November 29th with this article uncovering all of these organizations as Russian propaganda fronts, including the Drudge Report, Lou Rockwell, the Ron Paul Institute, Zero Hedge, all of these, major and mainstream alternative or independent websites are now tarred as being somehow in the employ or doing the bidding, witting or unwitting, of Vladimir Putin. It's something that is so insane it would be laughed off, except for the fact that now this legislation puts together a federal government task force, including the CIA, the State Department, the FBI, to go out and identify so-called foreign propaganda and fight against it. But this really lays the groundwork for a serious crackdown on the First Amendment, for a serious crackdown on the independent media, and it's really one of the greatest dangers that I've seen come down since the Patriot Act.
It certainly seems to be. I mean, I guess you're allowed to have your First Amendment rights as long as you agree with the government. I mean, it sounds so totalitarian. It sounds so much like a dictatorship, doesn't it? Jeff, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, they love free speech and they love democratic voting until the wrong guy wins. Right. Then all of a sudden we have to pull back from all this loose talk, and nobody has the right to yell fire in a crowded movie theater. I love it. But you have to understand, I still see articles every day pointing out the hypocrisy of the left in the wake of this election, calling everyone racist and deplorables, and they don't fight fair. And my gosh, they were saying the Electoral College was great in 2012 when Obama wins. Now when Trump wins, they're saying it's terrible and racist. It doesn't do anybody any good to point out hypocrisy in politics. Politics is war. There's no fair. There's no rules. Okay, this is just an exercise engaged in by people who have not yet reached the point where they're shooting at each other.
Right.
And in that sense, I suppose it's good. I'll take it over war. Don't get me wrong. Right. But this idea that there should be fairness or that something's constitutional or unconstitutional, this is just force. It's just about winning and getting your way. And progressives never, ever, ever sleep. They are relentless. They're not going to go away because of this election or any other election. And if they won, 75% of everything they want, they'll create another 25% that they want to win. We have to disabuse ourselves of this idea that there's, rules, Robert's Rules of Order, or that we should be pointing out political hypocrisy. It's played at this point. We should all get it, and we need to stop looking at politics like we're in second grade, and start understanding it for what it is. It's just a farce, and it's It's just about imposing a particular viewpoint on other people using the state and its guns and its jails and its taxes and its regulations as the mechanism.
Right.
You know, I get a little tired sometimes when I see articles pointing out hypocrisy. My God, you know, it's time to use a different language.
Yeah, hypocrisy. It's just war, as you say. Well, probably the most serious threat, and I think both of you would agree with this, the most serious threat to our liberty is the Federal Reserve and the ability of government to create money out of thin air and use it, and then use our military-industrial complex to enforce the dollar regime throughout the world. I saw something that I'm just hoping. Maybe it's just hope. Maybe it's just a fantasy. But a fellow named John Allison, who's a banker, was apparently rumored to be a potential Treasury Secretary under Trump. But he, of course, chose a Goldman Sachs guy instead, as we know. But I'm reading now in the last day or so here, I came across some information that suggests that John Allison, who is a libertarian of sorts, at least, that he is apparently wrote a book after about the 2008-2009 financial crisis, and apparently Vice President-elect Pence liked his ideas and thought that it made a lot of sense in terms of explaining why and how we got into that mess. And he recommended John Allison and was able to get him in front of Trump, and they spent an hour and a half or so. Now, the rumor is this, that Allison, who is apparently in favor of making gold legal tender again, maybe, and I think that chances are snowball's chance in you-know-where, of replacing Janet Yellen. He wants to close down the Fed, but realizes that can't happen quickly, so he's suggesting that rather than eliminate the Fed, make gold legal tender again alongside the dollar to compete with the dollar. I mean, that sounds like a dream to me. I'm not sure. Maybe I dreamed it last night. Maybe it's not possible. But Jeff, do you think if Trump wanted to, could something like that happen and Trump stay alive?
No, I don't think Allison could be chairman of the Fed. But let's backtrack for a second. He was the interim head of the Cato Institute for about 2 years. He came in as the interim chair to sort of find a new head of Cato. And his book is actually quite good. He was a banker in private practice for BB&T and I believe other commercial banks prior to that. So he has some of his own wealth. He's a successful guy. And he is a gold standard guy, to his credit. He is unabashedly an anti-Fed guy. And I really think I was quite pleasantly surprised when he was even thought of as a possible nominee for Treasury Secretary. And apparently he did actually go spend some time with Trump in his office, but ultimately obviously wasn't named. But someone like Allison in today's world is probably still a little too far beyond the pale to have serious consideration as Fed chair. I remember the joke used to be when Ron was running for president that it's like trying to have an atheist as Pope. So I think that might apply somewhat to Mr. Allison. But look, would Hillary Clinton even be entertaining John Allison in a discussion during her transition period? The answer is no.
No.
So the fact that we're even talking about this stuff shows that the media's grip on this is crumbling. So good for Trump for talking to him.
Right. Well, I have a couple more issues, but one of the things that I wanted to get to before we lose track of the time, and we don't have time, I want both of you to talk a little bit about what you're doing with your respective positions, and then tell people how that might care about what you're doing, how they might be able to donate. For example, Daniel, you go first. The Ron Paul Institute. Tell our listeners what it's about and how they can, if they care about what it's about, how they can donate to the cause.
Well, thank you, Jay. Well, the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity really is taking, some of the things that were closest to Ron's heart when he was, his entire political life and moving them forward in a different way now that he's out of politics directly, in an educational way. And we We had an enormously successful conference in Washington, D.C. this past summer, our first conference, and we're looking forward to doing more. But what we do is we spark the debate. We publish, a highly curated website that's very well trafficked. And, when the Washington Post says that we're horrible fake news, I jump up and down for joy that we're, it's much better to be noticed by these people and attacked than to be ignored. So it shows we're getting somewhere. But Dr. Paul and I do the Ron Paul Liberty Report every day as well. And we reach millions of people that way. As a matter of fact, we recently had on the show the faithless elector, the gentleman who actually voted for Ron Paul in the Electoral College for the presidency. So there's a lot of fun stuff that we do and interesting stuff that we do. Our website is ronpaulinstitute.org. We run a very tight ship, and of course, we're extremely grateful for any support we can get.
Oh, I know you run a tight ship. Jeff, talk about the Mises Institute briefly and tell people how they can contribute.
Well, pure and simple, we're here for education. We think that the Austrian School of Economics is correct, although not monolithic, and we want people to learn real economics, and we want them to do it cheap, if not free, and we want them to do it on their own time. So we really see ourselves as a school of sorts, but radically redefined for the new era. Most people don't have the time or the inclination, especially beyond a certain age, to go attend or pay for a brick-and-mortar institution. So, through the Mises Institute, you can learn economics as much or as little as you might care to. You might want to do nothing more than follow us on Twitter and occasionally click a link and read an article for 3 or 5 minutes. And as a result of that, educate yourself. You might want to do the opposite. Come to our building, spend an entire summer with us doing research, learn everything you can about economics, and pursue a graduate or a doctorate in economics and make it your life's work. So we have people from all walks of life who go to each one of those extremes and everything in between. We have truck drivers who listen to our stuff on Sirius Radio. We have housewives. We have homeschoolers. We have soldiers. We have college professors who unindoctrinate themselves through our material. We really want to be sort of a full-service, one-stop shop where you can come learn what we would call correct or real-world economics and unlearn what you've been taught, especially if you took a couple classes in college with a Samuelson textbook or something like that. And so we really want to be out there flying the flag and be seen as the home, the global home of Austrian economics. So if you check out Mises.org and you like what you see there, certainly we'd accept a donation, but I think if you want to donate to us, it should be because you think you got something of value, not as a gratuity.
All right. Thank you for that. Well, with 2 minutes left, Jeff, I want to just ask you, there was an author and a book that's going to be published very soon. I mean, that I think might be very interesting to our listeners. One of the issues that I've had about the Mises Institute is it's really a lot of academics. But if people can actually see how those academics, how the rubber meets the road with respect to the theories, the Mises theories, which I believe absolutely explains how the world really works. But if people could really see the connection between the theory and their lives, it seems to me that would really turn people on to Austrian economics. Now, you have an author that's going to be hopefully on this show sometime soon. Can you take a minute just to tell us about him, who he is, and what his book is about?
Sure. Ronnie Stofferli is an actual Austrian, meaning he's of Austrian birth. He and a few co-authors wrote a book. He's a fund manager of a wealth fund in Austria, and he and some other fund managers wrote a book on how to apply Austrian economics to investing. So in other words, how to make money off of riding the booms and perhaps shorting the bust. So it's a very interesting read. Again, called Austrian Economics for Investors. So there's plenty of people out there in the real world using economics to invest. So why not Austrian economics?
Well, I look forward to it when that book is out and perhaps having him and you. And I want to thank both you and Daniel for being with us again today.